Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the South Star Classroom. I am your host, Dr. Charles Cole III, here with my brothers, David Castillo, and our other partner is on his way. He's running on CP time because colored it covers a wide spectrum. He is included in that, but he will be here. And today we are very excited to have a certain conversation with you. It is the 75th anniversary of the Mendez case, and you will learn more about that. If you know, you've heard about Brown versus Board, but you probably haven't heard about the Mendez case, which helped make Brown versus Board actually possible. And as our show is about Black and Brown uniting and coming together, this is actually one of those situations where you can see how we have worked together and how our stories have kind of been intertwined. So that's coming to you from the South Star Classroom. And to tell that story, I'm going to throw it to my partner in crime, David Castillo. Here you go, bro.
All right. Yeah, thank you. Good to be here. Currently broadcasting from loud Jack London Square in Oakland, California.
I can't hear nothing. You good?
Okay, great. Awesome. So yeah, we're here in Oakland. Got to spend some time with some of the charter networks that I work with this week. So it's been pretty fulfilling. You know, essentially spending time in schools that are either, you know, mainly brown or, you know, Black and brown. So essentially segregated charter schools, but like segregated by design or by choice. We'll get into that in today's show as we talk about this, the Mendez case and Brown and what's happened since, because the landscape now has definitely changed. So anyways, glad to be here. Let's see what we got going on. If you are watching right now, thank you for being here. We'll definitely do our best to get to your comments. We've got some folks here. Good afternoon, Vicky. Good afternoon, Alonso. So we'll engage. Please like and share as we jump in. And are you ready, Charles, or did you check in? I'm not sure if you checked in, brother.
I'm ready, man. I think, you know, it's been a weird week for me, man. And I was in Oakland for about 8 days, and I was closing up my place in Oakland because I bought here in the Chicago area in the south suburbs for very
South Star.
cheap, might I add.
South Star.
Another South, right? But very cheaply, I might add, right? And I just hadn't been at my Oakland apartment since very often, you know what I'm saying? And I think that I'm still gonna be working in Oakland. I'm just gonna get a hotel when I'm there, but it's gonna be weird to not have an Oakland address. I've had one pretty much since I've been 11. We moved to Stockton for a little bit, but I came right back to the Bay. And I'm still an Oakland dude. You know, I might have been born here in the Chicago area, but for all intents and purposes, I'm a Chicago guy. And it's just been busy. So I'm just getting things shipped, and I got to do something from Oakland today. So I have to leave, unfortunately, at the 3:30 Pacific mark. But I'm really happy to be here, man. And I'm so happy. I just want to give props to you, David, for producing this show and this topic. And I didn't even know it was the 75th anniversary of the Mendez case. And I'm familiar with it because of Dr. Howard Fuller. As I study the Brown versus Board decision, I didn't know before talking to Dr. Fuller and now talking to you, the significance that our Brown brothers and sisters actually made, like the significance that you all had in making sure that the Brown v. Board case could even go forward the way that it did. So I'm really interested for you to teach our people, because now class is officially in session. Welcome to the South Star Classroom.
Yeah, there you go. This definitely feels like a, hopefully it'll be interactive, but we're definitely going to bring some content and some history. There's Omar. Omar, how you doing, sir?
Man, I am doing well. I am straight up in Califas. I feel like it's apropos for our show today that we're talking about Westminster case. Wearing a hat of my alma mater in California with, not a bad view.
I mean, you look great, man. You look great.
I know exactly. You're down at Mission Bay. There you go. I know you.
I am. Yeah, dude. You know the area well.
You're on the Bay side.
I'm on the Bay side.
Did you guys connect while y'all are all out there? Unfortunately, I just left the Bay Area, so I'm not there with you two. But did you two get together?
We didn't. I left.
No, man.
Yeah, I left. I wasn't going to travel, but I ended up traveling, and so I'm in Oakland right now. So next time, man, we're going like this.
You know what it is? Let me tell you how you can get all of us in the same place. First and foremost, the South Star Classroom is a consultancy, not a podcast. So we work on equity. We work on student achievement for Black and brown young people. We do research. We do coaching. We do the full thing. So if you need that in your neighborhood or your community, reach out to us, and we will go from there. But our job is to serve and to make sure our people got what they need. So with that being said, that's how we will get to the same place. But go ahead and lead us. Just to bring you up to date, Omar, David is leading us on the Mendez case, which is 75 years old today. So, you know, we're going to give him the screen, and he's going to inform our community on what that is. And we're going to go in from there. And Omar, I have to leave at the 30 mark, but y'all can rock out on it after that.
We're on it, man.
Cool. All right. Well, let's get started here. Class, let's have a seat. Put your phones away. You know, we want 100% engagement. I'm going to be tracking all of you. What do they call it? Slant? No, we don't do slant here.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. So this came onto my radar a couple of weeks ago, that April of this year is actually the 75th anniversary of a very key state court case out of California called Mendez versus Westminster. I think it's either a school district or a locality. It's located in Southern California in Santa Ana, not Santa Ana, but it's called Santa Ana. And it's a court case from 1947. And so the reason that that's important is for, you know, a number of different factors. But just to break it down, you know, California, even before it was California, was, you know, obviously native territory, native land. And, you know, in the early to mid 1800s, historically speaking, you start to see other people, you know, showing up on the scene, Spaniards, Mexicans, and then Manifest Destiny. And you start to, you know, a lot of different people are living in what is now California. Chinese are coming over. But at some point, you know, you fast forward to 1947, up to that point, there really weren't any official rules, you know, that were governing how education worked. And so what we had is truly a system, you know, thinking specifically in California of schools that were unequal and separate, right, by design. And so this all leads up to 1947, actually happened a couple of years earlier. A family with the last name of Mendez was living in the area. Again, think about Orange County in Southern California.
Okay.
And the family had moved around, and it's actually a very interesting historical fact here. The family had moved onto a farm to take over the you know, production and management of a farm for a Japanese family that had been interred in California during World War II, right? And so you have all these historical connections. So they moved to a different area, and they're trying to get their daughter into school. The daughter, I think it's Sylvia Mendez. She has a couple of cousins, and so the three of them try to enroll in the Westminster schools. And they say that the cousins can go. She had two cousins, but she couldn't, even though they all had the same background. Her cousins were from a different part of the family with a less, you know, Mexican, Hispanic sounding last name. And so they said, your cousins can come here. They also had a lighter skin complexion. So you get into all these different, you know, interesting dynamics. But you can't come here because your last name is Mendez and you have to go to this other school, right? And so there was an access issue. And I think, you know, we all have our own different kinds of stories that go back in our families. I mean, I've spoken to this many times. I think one of the connections, my parents went to segregated schools in Texas. My parents were farm workers, you know, and even like in the mid 1900s in certain localities, when they'd be out on the road, you know, picking whatever in whatever region, New Mexico or Louisiana or Michigan, you know, there were certain rules. There's certain rules like Mexicans only, whites only. But one of the stories that my father had told me, which was pretty, you know, I mean, I'll never forget. It was, he had a cousin that had a daughter that, and I'll get back to the point of the story, that had passed away while they were out working the fields, you know, thousands of miles away from their home. And they needed to bury this young girl. And the city's mayor would not allow them to bury her within the city. This is in New Mexico, within the city's official graveyard. They had to bury her on the outside, right? So it's like even at death, there's like segregation, right? And it's crazy. And so now we're talking, you know, around that same time, the mid, you know, 1947, where segregation is alive and well. And so the Mendez family eventually somehow finds a pretty kick-ass lawyer, forgetting his name now, that had won some similar cases before, even back then, about like access to public parks for people of color, right? For Mexican or African Americans that, you know, weren't even able to access public parks. And so this attorney, you know, found out about this case and took the case on, right? So it was a you know, very popular, well-respected attorney. Long story short, you know, after, and even after the superintendent, you know, says, you know what, these people are not backing down. This is becoming a bigger thing. What does the superintendent try to do? Says, you know what, your daughter can actually come to our school. Just let's let this whole thing die down, right? And what did the family say?
So it was like, look, they was like, look, there's too much heat coming. We'll let a few you Latino folks in. Just
exactly
calm it down, calmate, right?
Yeah, calmate, yeah. You know, and they're like, no, we got a much bigger thing. We're much bigger fish to fry. And so, anyways, they ended up moving this case forward, and it was a case at the state level of California. So it wasn't a federal case. Didn't go to the Supreme Court. Went to the highest court in the state of California, and they won. And it launched an effort that eventually saw the desegregation of schools, the public schools in California, 5 years before Brown, right? So point being here is, like, it's very interesting because we hear about Brown. Brown was the big federal case that pushed back on separate but equal, right? Before equity was a word. And it laid the foundation for what happened with Brown. So I think, you know, historically speaking, another reason I wanted to bring this topic forward is because it's a very, very important benchmark, landmark case, even though it wasn't federal, but it did lay the foundation for the case that we all know about, which is Brown versus Board of Education.
And how did it do that, David? How did it help clear the path for Brown v. Board?
That's a good question. I mean, I think it signaled a shift in the courts, you know, and the way that the courts work is you work your way from like your locality up the chain of command to your state court, and then from your state court to your federal courts and to the Supreme Court. And this is kind of how things work on precedent, right? They have to look at other courts that have made similar decisions. And so when Brown came along, they were actually able to use the Mendez decision as leverage to push forward you know, what they were trying to do in the Brown versus Board of Education 1954 case. Yeah. So
question.
Yep.
I think we're probably going to get into it, so I'm skipping ahead a little bit. So worth mentioning Plessy versus Ferguson. I think that's going to be on the lineup. I think the question for me is, if Plessy versus Ferguson, which established that separate but equal is okay, what was so different about the Westminster Mendez case, David?
Great question. So I think what was fundamentally different about it is that even though, you know, there was this concept of separate but equal, right, on paper, in reality, when the courts studied conditions within the schools, everything from like physical buildings to the types of instruction that were offered, to, you know, general conditions, they saw that it wasn't equal. So even going back to like 1947, right? You know, you see schools in California that were putting Mexican children It's like, hey, we have, what do we have now? They're called it's like linked learning pathways, right? Career pathways. We call it different things in different states. Well, they had a version of it in 1947. If you're a Mexican and you went through the Mexican public school, you were in the kind of custodial labor, unskilled labor pathway, right? If you went to a white school, you were in the kind of professional sort of realm pathway, teaching higher level skills, language skills, math, science, general curriculum, right? But what they saw in the Mexican schools was that they're pretty much preparing them to go into a life of hard labor, right? Unskilled hard labor. And that's where the difference was.
So therefore separate, but not equal.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Even though they said it was. Yep. And so that was 1947. Then we get Brown in 1954. Charles, do you want to talk about the Brown decision here briefly before we jump into what Brown, all this opened up?
Yeah, so this helped lay the groundwork for Brown in a sense of there's precedent set, right? So it could be added on, and for folks that don't know, Brown is actually not just one case; it's a bunch of cases, a multitude of cases, and it was tried. There was two separate Brown. There were two separate Brown cases, and it was basically a roll up from a bunch of different cases across the country. Sorry, I just hit the microphone. So what that did was that allowed for the actual statement was made that separate there is no separate but equal. It's not a thing. And people that wanted integration got what they wanted. They wanted integration. That's something that they wanted to have. Now, there was a lot of unintended consequences from Brown versus Board, right? Like all the black teachers got fired, and kids in ghettos, black kids in black neighborhoods were forced to be bussed out of our neighborhood to go to white schools per se. However, it was a landmark case, and I'm really interested to get into the conversation of segregation, David, like segregation versus choice. And I think that there's a difference there, but we can talk about it, but you leading us, brother. So yeah. I don't want to get ahead of us.
So let's go back. Let's go back before we go forward. We've got a comment from Toya, Plessy versus Ferguson, right? This is like the one of the other like benchmark earlier cases. And so this is the way that federal statute and Supreme Court cases they're all built on precedent, right? And so, Omar, why don't you kind of take us back and give us a quick, because you're right, we can't talk about Brown, we can't talk about Mendez, I'm talking about Plessy, right? So let's just do a quick Plessy connection, and then we're going to fast forward back to the future to the 1950s.
Hey, I feel bad because we didn't tell you that you had to be stocked up on Plessy, brother. So hopefully you
he's got it. He went to Stanford. He went to Stanford. He's got it, man.
Constitutional law. What's up? Shout out to my boy Alonzo. 1947 sounds like 2022. Plessy's very easy. The case was essentially based on the fact that during the times of segregation, what folks were arguing was that like our situation is not equal. Despite the fact that we are separated, things are not equal, whether it be education, whether it be hotels, whether it be schools, particularly public services. They were finding that clearly things were completely unequal. So the case was brought up to essentially refute the fact that like separate and equal is fake. It's a fallacy. It's not real. We need to stop the segregation movement in its tracks in every way, shape, and form. You're not just talking about education and healthcare, but for all public facilities. And the long story short about the case was that they essentially said, sorry, listen, you're separate, but things are equal. You have a water fountain, they have a water fountain. You have a school, they have a school. Now, it's okay that you're separate because you're given equal opportunity, which is BS. They were certainly not given equal opportunity against the law. If you looked at facilities, they were radically different. This is what brought the fodder, if you will, to the Westminster case, because the case in Plessy versus Ferguson was essentially blind to the fact that separate was not equal. They were like, no, everyone's got theirs, but everyone has theirs. So because they are equal, the separation factor, everyone still guaranteed their constitutional rights. And it wasn't until Westminster to see that the disparaging nature of educational output. So like, that's a fancy way for being like, yeah, dude, if you're teaching Mexican students like unskilled labor and these kids how to be lawyers, that is not an equity of opportunity. That's a straight up unequal. So that is what destroyed the separate but equal situation that started not only breaking down the desegregation of schools, but essentially like the desegregation of everything. Now, bear in mind, like a lot of this was starting to be precipitated by World War II. Eisenhower desegregated on his own the military. It's like, this is stupid. Like, we can't have a segregated military. This isn't like 1865. So Eisenhower's decision that separate was not equal based on his own decisions for his own military was an interesting segue for Westminster and then for Brown. But the thing that said segregation was cool was the Plessy versus Ferguson case. I could get more detail, but those are your basics.
Yeah, that's great, man. That Stanford education is paying off now.
It's that constitutional law course, man. Yeah.
I did constitutional law at Cal State Hayward. So me and my state school, we did okay. Go ahead. You know, we ain't Harvard or Stanford or wherever you can, you know, the Ivy brother, but you know. What did you do undergrad again, David?
UCSD, and I did take constitutional law. I got the big thick book still. It was a fascinating class.
So for the people that's not familiar, we are actually in the opposite row of like in California how the rankings go. So I am a state school kid. David is a UC guy, and our guy Omar is Ivy West, the Ivy of the West Coast. Top tier private Stanford. So we got every base covered. We just need somebody from community college. Any of y'all go to community college? I did to do prereqs, but
I did. I went to community college.
Okay, cool. We got every system covered.
Yeah. I got
did it to do prereqs for grad school.
Yeah.
We'll be sure to have Omar in our next show about private schools and how they drain public resources and bleed the public of vital resources. Okay.
Oh man!
All right, let's get back on this thing.
Which by the way, just want to say really quickly, ringing endorsement for the South Star Classroom, ladies and gentlemen. We have all your bases covered. Hire the South Star Classroom.
Yeah, public, private. I was probably homeschooled for like a week at some point when I was young. I don't know.
Really?
Okay.
You know,
that's dope.
Okay, so we end up in, and really where we're going with this show is thinking about, you know, all the different official court cases that set particular precedent. And then what happens is, you know, segregation continues, right? Via different mechanisms. Some would call it systemic. I think systemic racism. That's what it is. They didn't used to call it that. But we're talking about de facto segregation. We did a show on like redlining, right? And so now it's 2022, and Miss Mendez, who's still alive, right? This is not ancient history. This is like happening right now, right? It's fascinating. She has several schools named after her, and she went, Jim Crow. And so she goes and does visits of the schools that are named after her now, right? And she's like, they're all Latino kids. Why the school that's named after me? You know, my name is on a pivotal landmark benchmark California case that led to the segregation of schools. Why is the school segregated, right? I think it's kind of like throwing her for a loop. There's some other people that are involved, you know, and I'm like, it's, you know, not so easy just to like desegregate now when people are living in particular areas, and then at the same time schools and school systems do their enrollment and school assignment by address, right? It gets very complicated. And so officially, schools should be desegregated, but we know in 2022, many of them are still segregated, particularly in California, that has, probably one of the largest school age population of Latino children, is still the most highly segregated state in the country when it comes to education and Latino children, right? I heard that earlier today on the radio. So, like, all for nothing, what we want to talk about, and I think also with the lens of the South Star classroom, is, we talk about the importance of brown-led schools for brown children, black-led schools for black children. And so the question now is, we used to think about it in a framework of separate and equal, said that wasn't okay, desegregate, and now we're talking about like the concept of like, is it okay, is it appropriate, we'll have a discussion about this, to have charter schools and public schools and private schools that are by design and by choice, single race, single demographic schools, because this is what people were fighting against. It calls into question many things. It calls into question the concept of choice. It calls into the question of maybe it's not equal, but separate but equitable, right? Which is the new concept of giving people actually what they need based on their needs.
Right.
And it calls a number of things into question. And so I want to start there and just kind of get your initial thoughts on that piece, given the current landscape. I mean, Omar,
well, I know I gotta leave. I gotta leave in 3 minutes. So
yeah,
I'm gonna go ahead and knock it out.
I'm glad I got to you. Yeah.
But I mean, I think there's a difference between separation and choice, and I think there's a difference between segregation and choice. And part of that is, as we're having this discussion, segregation is being told what I can do, where I can go, and that's a problem. It should be illegal. Choice is having all the information and having options of what I want to do. So if there are black people or brown people that say, I want to start my own school where I got black teachers, I got black students, and it's affirming, or brown people say, I want to have, brown students and brown educators. And in most Chinatowns you go to in the country, even in the public system, they have, even in Oakland is a good example. Right in Chinatown, there's Lincoln Elementary School, which has a majority Chinese teaching population, and they teach majority Chinese students, even though they're in the heart of Oakland, in a very, very like mixed race place. That's not segregation. That's self-determination, and that is choice. And I think that this case was really important because I actually respect whatever a parent wants to do with their child. That's their child. If they feel like they want to have their child in proximity to white folks because there's a different dearth of equipment and materials and resources available, then that's their business. But if somebody also says, hey, if a black mom says, I want to have my kid with black teachers and only black students because I need them to have a different type of Afrocentric experience, I'm okay with that too. I am truly for whatever parents want. And I think that this case is so legendary because it helped clear the path for Brown. And it was one of the first places I got a judge to say separate is not equal. And that was the bigger issue, right? It's like, you're saying separate but equal, but it's not really acting out in practice. And that's a problem for our kids. So, I'm going to close out and say my piece and let you guys finish up. But I'm just so grateful to this case, to the Mendez case, and just what it was able to do and how it was able to move this country forward. And I do think brown Americans, especially Mexican Americans, she was Mexican, right, David? I want to be very clear on that.
Yep.
Yeah, I think they should be very proud of one of the unsung heroes just of this movement that allowed for us to demand more and demand better. So I'm going to peace out in a second. And David, you got this. You're going to run captain. Don't forget to end broadcast, okay? It's right at the top right. You got this, brother. But with that being said, man, that's how I feel. And I just want to thank you so much for making us review, and honor the 75th anniversary of the Mendez Westminster case.
Yep. Cool. All right. Have a great
Yeah,
weekend, sir.
man. Good to see you. Have a good weekend.
Yes, sir.
Peace.
All right. So a couple more things, and I'm gonna throw it up to you, and let's have a discussion. You know, I think what I hear often, and I'd forgotten this earlier, and I want to bring it up now, is this. You know, when we talk about, it's interesting. Like, at least in the areas of the country where, like, I'm doing work, and sometimes the loudest voices that speak out against segregation or charter schools that happen to be segregated by choice are not the people that rely on those schools. It's like it's pretty much like white folks, right? So I'm like, okay, I don't know what's going on there, but I want to raise this concept, which it's not a concept; it's something that people actually believe in. Like, it would be like one of these, like, you know, change my mind kind of things of like, is it possible to have single race schools for children with equitable resources that enable children to thrive? Or on the other side, there's this concept of like the magical powers of proximity to whiteness, right? That people talk about. And it's like, you know, like in the whole school integration, you know, movement. And I'm, you know, if that's what you want, that's fine. But I don't think we need to put all of our eggs into that basket to assume that if Black and brown children are somehow enrolled into schools that have higher percentages of white children, that they're somehow going to magically thrive. I haven't seen that yet. So, yeah.
Look, it is hard to find a regression analysis or an empirical analysis that's going to prove that all of a sudden the magic bullet was, I went to the like white school.
Yep.
You could be like, well, I tested better, I did better, and it's like, was that just me because I'm a good student? I had enough initiative to go to that school. Therefore, because I had the initiative to go to that school, I was already going to test well no matter what. So my few questions upon this is, because this is an interesting conversation. People are, I think, at the surface are like, we should have racially diverse schools. I totally agree. I think that's great. I'd love to. The reality is, like, sometimes people don't understand like the very simplistic component of like your community. El Paso, for example, is 85% Latino. So like, I'd love to have a very multi-ethnic school reality in every school in El Paso, but the overwhelming majority of people in El Paso are Latino. So like, where are you going to magically find that like diversity that people talk about? Like, it's not New York. Like, you're in New York City, cool. Like, maybe you can have the choice of doing such things. I mean, if you're in Newark and the overwhelming majority of students are Black, where are you going to magically start finding all the Latino and Asians and white folks to come into these schools? The difference, and I think Charles really hit this on the nose, is that you've got the difference between de facto and de jure segregation, right?
Can you define those just for the general public? Yeah.
Indeed. Thank you. I was definitely going to go into this, my nerdy side.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
the de jure segregation means essentially by law, you are forced into it. It's what Charles was talking about, which no one wants. I don't want to be forced into a situation. I do not want to be forced to be segregated. I want to be able to have the freedom of choice. De facto segregation is something very inherent within the Black and brown community. So like, when you talk about Tulsa, when you talk about, Southern California, when you talk about communities where Black folks wanted to live amongst themselves, to support themselves and thrive Black businesses, where Mexicans wanted to move in amongst ourselves to help each other out, to start our businesses, that's what's called de facto. That means it's by choice. We are deciding to do so. So as we move forward, we're having this like very interesting conversation between where I stand, and probably where David stands, but I don't want to put words into your mouth, which is, we should be given the choice. I want to run a Latino school, unapologetically 98% Latino, with heavy Latino cultural undertones and Mayan, Toltec, Aztec, and Mexican, Latin American symbolism everywhere. cool. Like everyone's welcome. You are absolutely welcome to come to the school regardless of race or anything else, but that's a choice.
Yep.
You choose to come here or not. And the fact that my students are being taught by first generation Latino, Latina teachers, mostly Mexican American, is also a choice, because the kids are going into classes with teachers who understand their circumstances and have had success. It's then saying to me, Omar, like, that's racist. Word? Like, you're gonna force me to do what? Bus in magical white, black, and Asian kids, which I'd love to have at our school, that are 15% of the entirety of the population of El Paso. From where?
You're not gonna do it. Yeah.
And yet we have folks who I think don't understand the nuance of this issue, who don't understand the difference between de jure and de facto, who don't understand this ideology of self-determination, basically say, yeah, dude, like, what you're doing is wrong. I'm like, what you're talking about? Like, I don't know what you're talking about. So I think in today's day and age, it's funny because the connection to Westminster to today is, I think, exactly what Mendez hoped for, which is, you can't tell us where to go and then corral us into inadequate schools.
Yeah.
Today, we've got the choice to go to other schools if we so wish, and we can vote with our feet, and thereby we have won, in my opinion, the Westminster Mendez case, because black and brown and white kids have their choice as to where they go to school. So now, how do you then say, and I pitch it to you, David, like, that's my quandary. Like, if everyone's made these choices then, and I pitch it to our audience, how do you then just magically, like, unify all the races together when people can move with their feet and to different, like, school districts? I mean, you tell me. I'm here to listen.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, I think now we're talking about, so two things. You know, the kind of school that you are creating in El Paso, the kinds of schools that I've worked with and I'm currently working with in Oakland that actually are a draw for the community, right? For a particular kind of community. Like, are these the schools, if they had existed in 1947, would have potentially put the brakes on a case like Mendez, because Mendez is like, oh, I got a good school, right? As opposed to, so Mendez had two choices, right? You go to the under-resourced, unequal Mexican school, or you go to the well-resourced white school and you be the rare Mexican in the white school. Those are both, like, poor choices, right? And so, you know, I mean, I think of going forward, the kinds of options that we're putting out now are, you know, speaking primarily about black and brown children, are, like, some schools that are either by design or by choice, focused on particular demographics. And, you know, I don't know what I'm doing here. Let's do that. You know, or offering, or, you know, offering and creating schools that are actually integrated by design thoughtfully, where it's not just about, you know, we've got some Latino kids, we've got some African American kids, but with, you know, inside it's kind of a shit show, right? We're not actually doing the deep work of really integrating the community, right? And so I think of those two things. The other last thing is, you allude to it, is like, how do you unwind, you know, all of the systems, the enrollment systems, the boundaries, where people live, what kind of schools they're assigned to, like, how do you undo all of that going through, like, you know, district lines, city lines, county lines, different, you know, regional jurisdictions? It's a very complicated web that we've, you know, woven ourselves over the last you know, now, like, what, 70 years since desegregation, right? And so, like, how do you how can you act? And then it's different in California than it is for Texas, because you know, every state has its own way of kind of how it runs and governs itself. So yeah, I think it's interesting. I do think charter schools can and should and are playing an important part because of the autonomies they have around where they can be and who they can serve, not necessarily tied to, the strict, you live here, you're going to go here. I mean, the only other option is, forcing people just to go back to their neighborhood schools. And that's actually, like, in a town like Oakland or in a town like San Diego, if you forced everyone to go back to their school that they were assigned to, it's going to be like a massive injection of segregation into the system, right? Because people are voting with their feet today. So
yeah, man. And look, schools are trying. So, like, for example, I'm in San Diego, dude. Like High Tech High. High Tech High is a charter school here who has written into their charter that they're going to basically pull a certain percentage of their kids from certain zip codes in order to create that, like, almost like 30-30-30, like 30% Black, 30% white, 30% Latino, like, 10% Asian, or whatever it may be, although there's a pretty prevalent Asian community here, so that seems like a small percentage.
Yep.
And look, that's cool, and I get it. The question that I have with the entire debate right now, because for our audience, we're celebrating Westminster versus Mendez because it's the 75th anniversary. Is that correct?
Yeah, yeah, and it's Mendez versus Westminster.
Mendez,
yeah.
sorry.
You
What
got
did I
to
say?
Plaintiff. You had the plaintiff and defendants backwards.
Oh, backwards. Yes, Mendez is the plaintiff. Westminster is the defendant. Right?
It's powerful when you're the plaintiff.
Very good call. So when you have the Mendez case that is essentially saying this is what we had to do because we didn't have a choice. 75 years later, we have a choice, but now what people are saying is that these segregated schools are bad. It's so bad. It's just like it was back in 1947, except worse. And I'm like,
yeah,
that's a very simplistic explanation about what's going on, because you're not taking into effect our conversations and previous discussions about redlining, about communities, about de facto, which is by choice segregation, people moving into communities with people like themselves. Hell, I'm a political science major. Dude, people are moving into communities based on like Christian ideologies, religious ideologies, simple political ideologies, like, oh, you guys are pro-choice, I'm moving there. You guys are pro-life, I'm moving there.
Yeah.
You can ask everyone in Sugarland, Texas, with a king of gerrymandering, people moving with their feet. But 75 years later, the debate continues to say we need desegregated schools. And I think it doesn't give any attention to the radical changes that have occurred in the last 75 years, all of the things that I just spoke about. But what I really want to ask our audience, what I really want to ask any experts is, like, is there any proof? Is there any empirical analysis out there that can show me definitively that if you put a Black or brown kid into a white school, all of a sudden everything will be solved?
Let's wait for some answers. Hold on, let's see if something.
I'm up for our audience to.
Yeah, we're good at wait time. We're good at wait time. Omar has just suggested he's putting out a call to the community. If where can we see evidence that school integration efforts have actually benefited Black and brown children? And we got crickets. All right.
I love that you put a banner for crickets.
Hey man, that's what it was.
I will ask this. The answer is no one's going to have any proof that this works. Now, here's my question for you, David.
Yep.
Now that there is all this, look, El Paso is a bubble. It's, like I said, 85% Latino. You may have grown up in a much more diverse city. I guess my question to you is, outside of the realm of education, well, it's very much integrated in it, is the question of society is integrated, which I'm going to throw a wrench in a second.
Okay.
People are going to say society is integrated. So if you've got this homogenized school of only Black, only brown, how are you going to then know how to interact with people outside of your race if you've never had that opportunity to do so in school? What would you say to that argument?
Can you give that to me again? Like they're saying that you're
Absolutely.
saying that society is integrated, like somehow we have evidence of that, and therefore why shouldn't our schools be integrated?
Yeah, like society is integrated. So if your schools are homogenous, if they're the same, how are you going to learn to survive in an integrated society when your school's not integrated? It's like,
There
where
you
did
go.
you practice hanging out? Like for me as a brown
That's
kid, like where'd you practice hanging out with white and black kids? Is essentially what they're saying, because you should be doing that in school.
Yep. I mean, I think there's three scenarios there, and you know, I've worked in the schools, so I'm not making this up. I'm speaking from a certain level of experience, and I know you are too. Is there are people and families and parents that want their kids in schools with children that look like them. Period. Punto. That's it. You know, that's where they're comfortable, right? There are families that believe in the power of integrated schools, and they search for those choices, right? And so I think we have to be real and honest about that. Like, going back to the concept of choice, I think if we go back and you ask parents and you ask families and you ask communities what they want, we will get answers, right? And the answer is like people want different things for different reasons. At the same time, from my experience in talking with young people, so I'm talking about like high schoolers, Latino high schoolers that grew up in East Oakland and went to smaller charter high schools, like single demographic schools,
Right.
and then all of a sudden they're like at UC Davis or at UC San Diego or at San Diego State or UCLA. It is a culture shock, right? They go through culture shock, and that's very real, and they speak about it
Very
too.
much so.
And so, I mean, I think there are certain things that we can do to mitigate those things. But I think at the end of the day, everybody's going to respond to it differently. But it's a real thing, and I think the most valuable voice there is the voice of the people that we're talking about, which are young people, and they speak to it. They're like, yeah, like generally what the narrative that I hear is like, yeah, I like my high school because it was small, it was safe, I got all the support I needed. Maybe I got too much,
Right.
especially as I was an 11th or 12th grader.
Yeah.
Just holding my hand. And then you go off into the world of like, really harsh deadlines, and like, oh, you didn't fill out that form, you lose your financial aid or this or
Yep.
that or whatever. You didn't read the syllabus, you were late 4 times, you're dropped from the class and we're taking your money.
Yeah, man,
Hard lessons, but also like, integrating with Asian kids or white kids or kids from different backgrounds, also socioeconomically too, right?
yes.
I'm like from East Oakland, and all of a sudden I'm like in like, hey, there's the Latino student group on campus, but like these are like bougie Mexicanos from like El DF. This is different.
Yes.
But kids at that level, kids that have made it that far, I think, I don't want to go off topic, but I feel like, they're pretty strong. They're pretty resilient. They can get through this stuff, and they get through it. And then they become much better people and like so well-rounded. And like, you go through something like that and you come out the other side and like, you're ready, you're ready for the world.
There's inherent challenges to that. And I will say this one for our listeners: DF, Distrito Federal, is Mexico City. It is Mexico City. They call it the Distrito Federal, the federal district. And that is a beautiful town, beautiful city. To answer Nicole, because I was looking at her comments, to both as Omar and to channel my inner Charles Cole. As Omar, I will say that is the exact situation that I think David, Charles, and I are talking about, which is, how are you going to complain about homogenized schools with only like brown kids and brown teachers when we've got exceptional teaching going on? We have exceptional opportunities going on. We have an exceptional culture going on. It's hard for me to be like, yeah, what I need in my school is racial diversity to solve everything. I'm like, no. I already solved most of these issues, and we as a staff, as an organization, have solved so many of these issues that regardless of the race, that is what's up. And that's what people are saying, is that race is going to solve these issues. Racial integration is going to solve these issues. It's like, no, it's not. Extraordinary education, extraordinary teachers, extraordinary curriculum, extraordinary culture.
Yeah.
These are the things that we have to solve. It's just that because that is very difficult to achieve, it's so much simpler to be like, this one thing's going to just solve it for everybody.
Yeah.
And like, yo, look, like you've got the choice. Now, to channel my inner Charles Cole, because I think I know what Charles is going to say.
Are you a doctor? Are you a doctor? Can you do this?
Listen, man, I am not a real doctor. Despite my very fancy degrees from very elite universities, ladies and gentlemen, I am not a doctor. I'm not a real doctor. Okay. So I am going to give the peasant version of our leader, Dr. Charles Cole, and enter as best of a doctor as I can. I love it, man. I love that I always have to mention that because I'm so proud of him. And I'm like, how do people call themselves doctor and they ain't doctor? And this man's a doctor. Charles would be like, look, everybody, check this out. 80% of our teaching force is white women. So what are you trying to tell me about racial segregation? Or excuse me, desegregation. The teaching force is homogenous. So how are you going to sit here and talk to me that our classrooms should be diversified when our teaching force is not? That again is what I'm trying to, going back to Ahmad, it's missing the point. You're saying, let's get a classroom of Black, brown, and white and Asian kids and it's going to solve everything. But you haven't solved the fact that the teachers have no idea what our Black, brown, and Asian kids have gone through because they didn't grow up in those neighborhoods. They didn't go through those scenarios. They weren't first generation college and they didn't suffer racism. Whereas all of us did. We had that talk real early. Everyone had that kitchen talk. So if you never had that talk, then how in the world are you going to sit here and say just putting these group of kids together is going to solve a problem? It is a very ignorant,
irresponsible,
irresponsible, unresearched conclusion on a very difficult problem. Which is teaching low-income kids who happen to be very Black and brown in this country to get that equity of opportunity, which is what Mendez, thanks David, versus Westminster was talking about. Getting back to Charles, Charles is going to be like, look, man, this is absolute BS. If you're trying to say that because you're going to put all these kids in the classroom and it's going to solve it when 80% of the teaching force is white, and what, somehow or another, like white people are going to come save us when we have done an extraordinary job as a community, cultivating our community, bringing in our community, creating these schools that are exceptional for our Black and brown kids. How are you going to come tell me, the superintendent of a school district that is mostly Latino, that, oh no, I know the answer to your problem? Like, no, you don't. If you did, you would have already solved it. But to give a shout out to my boy Alonzo, this is what happens. People outside of our sphere make very interesting and irresponsible conclusions with zero expertise and think that this solves the problem, but then it creates a cluster mess for us because then we have to sit here and debase it because I'm like, that's not the problem. You're not getting to the root cause of the issue. For me, and I think this goes into what Nicole was saying, is like, hey, listen, like if you want to go and send your kids to a well racially integrated school, perfect. And then if you want them to have the Black or brown experience, perfect. You can join these organizations. You've got that ability to do those things because you've got, the chance to vote with your feet and be able to solve the problem yourself, which, by the way, is a very responsible way of saying, here's how I'm going to take personal accountability for the things that I want for my child, which is exactly the point of the Mendez versus Westminster school case, which is we should have the choice as to where we want to go and what we want to do versus just simply telling us this is your only option. So shout out to Nicole, very astute comments and very good participation. Deeply appreciate it. Shout out to Alonzo as always. And just kind of your thoughts on that, David.
Thank you. Thanks everybody for the comments. And Nicole, we're just looking at your last comment. I think it gets to the heart of the matter, which is at the end of the day, it's at its most like purest form, it's like survival. Like I need to get my child or my children into a school that is going to, where they will be safe and where they will learn, right? And they will be able to develop in a positive environment. So I get that. And we also talk about, I think one of your earlier comments, Nicole, was around, this idea of the proximity to whiteness, or being in better proximity to high quality teachers and better opportunities. So this gets to the idea of I think in 1947, I don't know when the modern day concept of equity came into play. I think in 1947 it was pretty basic. It was like equal, right? But I do think the context is absolutely different now, and so what we're talking about is this idea of separate but equal. Like, that's just not something that's going to be able to, like, we're not buying it, right? However, is there a concept of separate and equitable, right? And that means schools for children of color, Black and brown children, that have equitable resources, considering where they live, considering their backgrounds, considering the demographics of the community. So we're talking about everything from a school building to the quality of the curriculum, to the demographics of the teachers, and to the quality of the teachers, right? I said this earlier, I think before the show started, but if a charter network ABC can build a high quality, modern, safe, green building in the Lower East Side of a particular town that's actually educating children, and there is no integration, are people okay with that? Because that's what's happening now, right? It gets to the root of the matter. I think in 1947, the menu of services or choice just wasn't quite there, and so it was either like this or that. And so I just wanted to call that piece out. Let's see what else we have here in the comments. There you go. That's it. It's basically, talking about facilities, right?
Right.
All these things matter. Yeah.
And I want to bring this back to a couple things and kind of get us into a bit of a closing out. So as I was going back into Plessy versus Ferguson, which was the Supreme Court case that established that separate but equal was okay, the opinion was, and look, going back to this situation, this is a weird case because essentially this is about like someone buying a railroad ticket in Louisiana, here's New Orleans, and getting on a train. Now this man was like 7/8 white, 1/8 black, but because of the 1/8 black and like Dred Scott, which is a previous case, and all these other cases that established, I think if you were like a 16th that race, you were that race, therefore you're black. Like, this dude was put into the black car, and he didn't want to be in the black car. He wanted to be in the white car. And it didn't matter if he was in the black car or the white car. It was about the mobility between carts and saying, I should have the freedom of mobility to any cart. You can't segregate me to this one cart in the back. It doesn't allow me equal access to the rest of the train's amenities. It doesn't allow me equal access to the other areas, not to mention the fact that, like, you see in this car, it's not quite equal. But guys, this was 1883. So they were like, be quiet. Now, the reason that he filed this case, ladies and gentlemen, just for our sake, is that, like, this is all predicated on something called the 14th Amendment to the United States Constitution. So this was one of the 3 amendments to the Constitution that happened after the Civil War, that was predicated by the Civil War. So the 13th Amendment ended slavery. Okay? The 14th Amendment is called the Equal Rights Clause, which essentially says that no matter what the race, everyone should be equally protected under the law. Okay. In essence, what happened after the 14th Amendment is the South decided to do segregation, which was, in my opinion, a direct violation of the 14th Amendment. But what they said is like, no, everyone's got equal. It may be separate. And that's how they got away with violating the 14th Amendment for 100 years.
Yep.
So then what happens now is that you get into the Mendez case, and it said, look, this Mexican school doesn't have the same resources. It's not the same thing. Like it's Plessy versus Ferguson all over again. It's this railroad car that's certainly not equal and doesn't have equal access to all the amenities. This Mexican school is certainly not equal and doesn't have access to all these amenities. The question today, ladies and gentlemen, is racial integration the end-all be-all, panacea, the silver bullet, the cure-all? Is this going to solve everything? Or do we need to look significantly deeper into the root causes of what is keeping Black and brown kids essentially without equal opportunity, without equal access, in a subjugated state? And is that a very complex issue that requires an inordinate amount of research and a lot of nuance? Yes. And that is why we have the South Star Classroom. That is why we are here. That's why we love doing the show, to get down to the nitty gritty and the nuance. That's why we're asking folks hire us, because we understand the deep nuance and difficulty of this work. And it is not something that can just immediately be solved by one cure-all. So for all those folks who are arguing, and the Atlantic and New Yorker, this is going to solve the problem, my answer to them is no, it's not. You should go back to school, the South Star Classroom. Do your research. David?
That's it. Yeah. So I would say, just in terms of closing, I posted an LA Times podcast in the comments around the Mendez and Westminster case. If people want to listen to that, it's about 25 minutes from Gustavo Arellano. He's a reporter for the LA Times. It's a pretty good podcast, 25 minutes. Put your headphones in. It'll take you on a little trip down memory lane, help you understand the context of this show. So again, we wanted to raise awareness around this particular case, which, I mean, it might be written into some state standards. I think it's written into the California state standards, but doesn't often get taught. Mendez versus Westminster, which did lay the groundwork for Brown versus Board. So these, this is a really good example of Brown and Black, power dynamics and challenging the system of actually working together, working with one another, right? They don't like to see us working together. And so they try to separate the stuff, right?
That's correct.
And so, reality is we were working together. Left foot, right foot, left foot, right foot. And so, I wanted to lift that up. And then also, bring the modern question, the modern day question of are certain compositions of schools that exist now, is that an okay thing for people to self-select into segregated schools? We're not answering the question, but that's the question of the day, which, maybe is good for a future topic, but it all relates to these cases because, context changes. At some point, segregated schools were obviously not equal, but what if we could have segregated schools that are equal and equitable? Is that an okay thing today? It's actually happening. So I guess it's okay for a lot of people, but just a question for our audience. So thank you for listening. Again, everybody, South Star Classroom. Thank you to all the leaders out there and teachers that are working in our schools, serving all children, Black and brown children. We appreciate the work that you do on a daily basis. Omar, appreciate you. And with that, we will see you all next Friday.
Everybody have a great weekend. Don't forget 3 p.m. Central, 3 p.m. Pacific time, 6 p.m. Eastern time every week. Have a great weekend, everybody.
You're on Pacific time now. You're West
I am,
Coast,
man.
West Coast.
Happy Passover. Happy Good Friday. Happy Easter.